Welcome to Archaeologist Behaving Badly. I'm Belle.
I'm Raquel.
And this is episode 12, which is our first or second Egypt episode.
It's our
first.
It's our first. It's definitely our third attempt at this episode.
Right. But we've chosen different stuff this time.
Yeah.
So we will end up doing multiple Egypt episodes. The first one we tried to record twice. Didn't work out, as we talked about last episode. So we just sort of deleted it and pretended it never happened.
I really needed to pretend like that never happened. Yeah, it was terrible. It was probably the worst one we've ever attempted. But this one hopefully will be much better.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, Egypt. I'm sure plenty of you know where it is in the world and know a bit about it. I actually decided to talk about an archaeologist who is famous for a lot of things, but his work in Egypt.
Okay.
Flinders Petrie.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. So he's not Egyptian, obviously, but his legacy is tied heavily to Egypt. So I wanted to talk about him.
Yeah, cool. He's like one of the OG, you know?
OG, and as I discovered, which I didn't know, fits in well to archaeologists behaving badly.
Okay, great.
Yeah, which I found out sort of at the end. I only talk about it at the end, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie was a British Egyptologist and a pioneer of systematic methods in excavation and recording in archaeology. So that's sort of how we know of him, because he was the first person that was really
really into it, kind of.
Not like, no, there has to be methods. Yeah. We can't just dynamite the ground.
Yeah. We can't just fuck everything up and then just hope for the best.
Yeah. He was born in 1853 in Kent, in England, to parents William Petrie and Anne Flinders. Anne was the daughter of British Captain Matthew Flinders, who was famous for circumnavigating Australia.
Ah, holy shit, no way.
Flinders Petrie is the grandson of Matthew Flinders.
I had no idea there was that connection.
No, me either.
I've never heard of that before. How cool.
He had no formal education, but his father taught him how to survey. I didn't look up actually what his father did for work, but his father taught him how to survey as a kid, and that was the foundation for his archaeological career, because he never actually went to uni or school or anything.
That's crazy. You would imagine that you probably would.
Yeah.
I guess I guess his dad was probably in the military or something.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Generally how you know how to do. Would be a
cartographer or whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The most important part is the drinking.
He did get tutoring in French, Latin and Greek. At age 8, he heard about the uncovering of the Braiding Roman villa on the Isle of Wight from family friends who were coming to visit the Petries.
Okay.
And he was horrified to hear about how the excavation was really roughly excavated, shoveled at age 8. And suggested that the ground should be scraped away inch by inch and not just dug out with shovels.
Man, that's
at age 8. How cute.
That's so cute.
As a teenager, Petrie surveyed numerous British monuments. He started with a late Romano-British camp that was on his family's land to understand the site's geometry. So he wasn't formally educated, but obviously he's from an affluent family and is smart and also being taught this stuff at home.
And imagine also just having Roman archaeology
just on your property.
What a great way to learn. So
it's nice for some.
Yeah.
At 19, he produced the most accurate survey of Stonehenge that had ever been done.
Wow. What?
At 19.
Oh my God, what a nerd. I love it.
I see so many memes about people in history achieving these incredible things at such young ages. I think Alexander the Great was 25 at the height of his conquests.
Yeah, his military career.
Yeah. And how 25-year-olds today are crying if they leave their vape at home.
Mate, like me at 25. Yeah.
I wasn't accomplishing very much.
I was definitely not accomplishing very much at 25.
In 1880, so he's 27, he travels to Egypt to survey the Giza Plateau. And in doing so, he was the first to ever study how the pyramids were potentially constructed.
Cool.
His studies and like his survey to this day provides much of the basic data about the pyramids and the plateau.
Wow.
When he returned to England that year, he wrote a number of articles about his findings and about the destruction and dilapidation of monuments in Egypt. From there, he was appointed as a professor in Egyptology at University College London, and the university offered him paid work excavating in Egypt.
Cool. Yep.
His first excavation was at a New Kingdom site at Tanis with 170 workmen. He chose not to have a foreman, which was unusual for the time. So normally, like, the people leading the dig wouldn't actually be that involved.
No, yeah.
But they would take all the credit, obviously.
Yep.
And take all the treasures.
Yeah. And loot everything, basically.
And the foreman would be in charge of the people actually doing the work.
Yep.
But he wanted to have complete control.
Yeah, cool.
And also he wanted to stop workers from just like smashing through stuff.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So keeping an eye on them to make sure that they don't like actually fuck up the site.
Not because he necessarily thought that they didn't know what they were doing, but because at the time that was how archaeology was done.
That was the methodology.
So
back then. Yeah.
They would get worked to the bone to dig as quickly as possible, smash through everything to find the glorious stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So because of that, he was really popular with the Egyptian workers. And he worked on a lot of Egyptian sites. He worked on like some Palestinian sites and a few others in the Near East. And he, in general, was like quite popular as someone running a dig.
Okay. So he was like a good guy, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But his good guyness was because of his passion, maybe like neurotic passion about being meticulous
and taking care and yeah.
Probably
Probably not just because he's
not just a nice guy. His most famous artifactual discovery was the Merneptah stele.
Okay.
How do you say that?
Steely? I thought it was Steely.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
As opposed to Steely.
It was like I read it and I was like, Steely.
I think it's.
Steli,
Oh my God.
Stella,
Can you just tell us
Stella.
what it is if we're wrong?
Shit.
Let us know.
In 1896, Petrie was conducting excavations at a temple site in Luxor, located north of the funerary temple complex of Amenhotep III. The temple he was excavating had been built by Merneptah, the son of Ramses II, which initially they were really confused about because a lot of the stone had the cartouche or like some indication of a pharaoh called Amenhotep III.
Okay.
But then he worked out that they had Merneptah's crew had destroyed Amenhotep III's temple.
Right, okay.
And used that stone to build his temple.
Yeah. Which is like a common practice. That happens,
Yeah.
like you see that quite a bit, you know.
Erase the previous whoever.
Yeah. Cancel culture.
They had like statues from Amenhotep III's temple. They found lots of like jackal statues that had been like smashed up and put into the foundations. So Amenhotep would have had like one of those. What are they called?
Yeah, we spoke about this the last time that we attempted to do this episode. Is it like not an, like is it an avenue?
Remember. An avenue.
Yeah, an avenue of like
Yeah. So they found like smashed up statues and stuff in the foundations. They found a statue of Merneptah and 2 stone stelae. One showed Amenhotep III, so it was stele from the original
Yeah.
temple that had been destroyed.
Yeah.
One showed the original one in battle with the Nubians and the Syrians. The other was made of black granite and was over 10 foot tall, which was the largest ever found in Egypt.
Wow.
And had text commemorating the building achievements of Amenephis and describing the beauty of the temple in which it originally stood. On the other side of it, Meneptah had his own inscription carved.
Okay.
So obviously with these artifacts, he chose not to like smash them up. He just wanted to like repurpose them. It was just like, we'll turn it around and put it against the wall and put our own stuff on it.
I mean, that's like environmentally friendly these days, right? Yeah, like repurposing, reusing.
So he had his own inscription carved on the massive black granite one, recording his triumphs over the Libyans and the peoples of the sea, which I meant to look up and write a little extra thing on the peoples of the sea, because I think that's a group that we don't actually know who they were. Some Mediterranean group.
Yes, I've seen that come up.
That we don't
know
no
much
one's
about.
been able to work out exactly who they were.
Yeah. Like the seafarers, like yeah.
And they were just called, in ancient Egypt, they were just called peoples of the sea. And it also contained the first mention of Israel in any Egyptian text.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, very cool discovery. Petrie also excavated at the Ramesseum in 1895-96, which I've only just written down here because I mentioned it in the last Egypt podcast, which we never put out because I think I talked about Ramses III in the last one, which I may do it again if we do another. Oh, was it Ramses III or second?
You talked about Ramses II last time.
Okay, Ramses II.
Yeah.
Right. Who had a museum dedicated to himself called the Ramesseum built.
I love that.
Which we love.
Yeah. I love those tickets on yourself. You know what I mean? Yeah.
In 1905, Petrie and his wife were excavating at a 12th and 13th dynasty turquoise mine in the Sinai Peninsula. And the site had a separate temple to Hathor. Here he discovered a series of inscriptions that were in what looked like hieroglyphs, but they weren't hieroglyphs. He thought it might have been a language sort of created by the workers, or when he studied it more, he realized it was alphabetic. So they were symbols, but not symbols representing things, symbols representing letters.
Okay, cool.
Using like linear, like little symbols of things.
Yeah.
This is called, or became known as, the Proto-Sinitic script.
Yep.
And it is the ancestor to almost all alphabetic scripts.
That's so cool. Really?
So he's discovered some massive
That's so cool.
things in Egypt.
I thought like that. I thought like the alphabet. I thought that came out of like, I don't know. I didn't think it came from Egypt. I thought it came from somewhere else. Like, I don't know. That's really cool.
It's, very.
It's very cool. Yeah.
It's very cool. Cool. He was knighted in 1923. And in 1933, he retired and moved with his wife to Jerusalem. He died in Jerusalem in 1942. His body was interred in the Protestant cemetery on Mount Zion, but he donated his head to the Royal College of Surgeons in London.
Just his head?
Just his head,
okay.
Which I thought was funny. I don't know how many people were doing that at the time, or if he just thought my brain and my head is very important.
Yeah, very valuable.
Cut it off.
Yeah. Study me. I'm that amazing.
Weird. Because this was...
And I bet you they just butchered it.
Well, because this was during World War II, it got lost in transport. It did eventually make it there. And...
It would have been, decomposed.
I think it was in a jar.
Oh, okay. Like pickled?
Yeah.
Gross. Fucking gross.
So it did make it there and it got stored in the basement, but at some point the label fell off. So I think for many years there was a head in the jar in the basement of University College London and they did not know whose head it was.
Just like
Just
some
a pickled
random
head in a jar.
Oh my God.
Eventually it was identified, I don't know how many years or decades later, and it remains there to this day.
Like some guy just like some cleaner being like, this is definitely Petrie. Guys, like, how did you not see this before? This is definitely him.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
That's wild.
But it's not on display. It's still stored
That would be
away somewhere.
I'm glad that's not on display.
I would kind of like to see it.
So morbid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pickled,
I think it would probably make me throw up.
head,
I don't have the strongest constitution.
No.
So his legacy and like why I chose him to talk about, even though he's not Egyptian, but his scientific excavation methods and recording of artifacts is so important to the development of archaeology.
100%. It's pretty much the foundations of the archaeology that we do today.
Yeah, like he's kind of the main guy.
Yeah. Like an actual method. Like a way of actually doing things properly. Yeah. And being meticulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giving a shit.
Yes, giving a shit.
Yeah.
Not just like,
Yeah.
Where's
blowing
the gold?
shit up and like, yeah.
Give me the gold.
Yeah.
Where am I? Oh, yeah. He was the first to use seriation for relative dating of pottery. So he like invented seriation.
That's crazy. Yeah.
He was a teacher and a mentor to many famous Egyptologists, including Howard Carter.
Cool.
Also famous Egyptologist who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb, if you didn't know, but I'm sure you did. He's famous for his many findings in Egypt, like lots of stuff we don't know about, but lots of stuff that's actually really, really fucking important.
Yeah. He is also like huge and he did a lot of Mesopotamian stuff as well, didn't he? Like I'm pretty sure, wasn't he involved with like the excavations like and stuff? Or was that someone else?
Yeah, I think
Maybe
that's
I get
someone
confused.
else. Is that Leonard Woolley?
That could be Leonard Woolley. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Sorry.
Because he did mainly Egypt. I think he had some Palestinian.
Maybe that's why I'm getting confused. Maybe I'm thinking of Palestine. Yeah.
Yeah, and a number of other things. However, part of his legacy, which I didn't actually know about, I suppose I didn't know that much about him before kind of doing this.
I guess like at
other
uni,
than the basic stuff.
we do like at uni, like in the first year that we did, there was like one of those first year subjects. You kind of
learn a bit about him.
I'll learn a little bit about, like that was so long ago. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's information that you never use again until now.
So, yeah, the other part of his legacy includes being a massive fucking racist.
What?
Yeah.
No, we were on such a good roll.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yep.
That's so annoying.
It's so disappointing,
It's so
right?
disappointing.
Like, I sort of got to it at the end of what I was reading and I was just like, of course.
I mean, think
Classic.
about it. Yeah, like, I mean, white English dude, like in
late
the
19th century. Affluent.
Yeah, he kind of like, fits the bill.
So he had pro-eugenics racial views and was very outspoken about them, and a dedicated believer in the superiority of northern people.
So he was a Nazi?
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck.
In his 1906 sociological series, Question of the Day, which was like a written article thing, I think. I'm not sure what
like a journal?
it was printed in.
Okay, yeah.
Like an article in a journal or an article in something to do with the university maybe or something. he constantly expressed his far-right views and his very questionable racial views. He ascribed all problems of England to racial denigration brought on by communism, trade, unions, and government assistance to groups that he found to be inferior and unsavoury.
I just find that so interesting considering his background of, digging in Egypt and seeing the most incredible engineering feats and cultural expression.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay, no worries.
Because I hear you.
Yeah.
But so these racial views spilled over into his academic opinions. He believed that any society is the product of racial biology. So he contended that the culture of ancient Egypt could only have been derived from an invading Caucasoid dynastic race.
Right.
So a race of Europeans that came there.
Right.
And did the stuff or taught the stuff.
Right, yeah. So he couldn't.
And that's the only way that it could have happened.
So he just couldn't get past the fact that, being there and actually seeing that stuff, that it could actually.
It just wasn't possible.
It just wasn't possible in his brain. Yeah.
Classic
19th century white dude.
Yeah. Yeah, and he put forward the idea that this invading European race had entered Egypt actually from the south in late pre-dynastic times, conquered the inferior, exhausted natives, and slowly introduced the higher dynastic civilization as it interbred with them. Cool.
Wow.
Cool.
This really took a way darker turn than than I actually thought possible. So
he engaged in fierce controversies with the British Museum's Egyptology expert, whose name was E.A. Wallace Budge.
Heard of him before, I'm pretty sure.
Who contended that the religion of the Egyptians was not introduced by invaders, but was essentially identical to that of the people of northeastern and central Africa, like many gods, animal gods, that sort of thing. However, at the time, because of who Petrie was as a scientist, not just a university person or someone working at a museum, like he was even famous at the time, so they just agreed with Petrie.
They just signed it off.
They just signed it off.
Yeah.
Because his views were more scientific. Petrie provided the anthropomorphic laboratory at University College London with numerous human skulls from Egypt for study and to illustrate theories of race.
Jesus, it just gets worse.
Yeah. The Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology at UCL, which still exists today, houses over 80,000 artifacts from Egypt and Sudan, spanning 7,000 years of history of the Nile Valley. And just kind of to wrap up, I've written... Did I have one more? No, I didn't. As we know, many academic disciplines in the 19th...
Let's keep going,
Yeah. As we know, many academic disciplines in the 19th and early 20th century were completely embedded with the racist ideologies of the societies in which they developed. It's important to acknowledge the racially deterministic ideologies of founding figures in disciplines as well as institutions like museums, universities, stuff like that, because what's stored there, what's been selected to be stored there, or the programs that are put forward have been influenced even today, like just being a part of those institutions or a part of those disciplines, they have been influenced by these ideas, even if we can't recognize it really like clearly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So just it's something that I mean, we've talked about this sort of stuff before with archaeology specifically and with museums and stuff. But yeah, it's just really important to remember that a lot of the stuff that what we do is based on what was going on 100 years ago, and included in that is some ideologies that
we don't agree with nowadays. Yeah. 100%. But that's history for you, isn't it? Like, we know more as we, as we get further in time, we understand things better, and we know more. And
and it doesn't mean we discount everything that he did.
I
We
don't think
can
it's fair, but
say he's a pretty fucking shit person.
100%. I was really thinking this was going to be
a nice one.
And no, that's a real fucking shame. There you go.
Flinders Petrie.
Shit guy. But, yeah, cool. That was super interesting. Okay, so
Your turn now.
My turn now. So the reason why I'm drinking beer this episode is because I'm going to talk about beer in ancient Egypt.
Awesome. I'm not joining Raquel with the beers because I think a beer is disgusting. So
I'm fine if it's alcoholic. I generally
I definitely, it just gives me a tummy ache.
Oh,
Like, I would also have the same. If it's alcoholic, I'll drink it, but it gives me a tummy ache.
that's a shame. Yeah, so beer has been a thing for a very, very long time.
Yeah. I feel like deep down in the recesses of my mind, I knew that the ancient Egyptians made beer, but I've kind of always associated it with Europe.
Yeah, so I think it actually started in Mesopotamia.
Okay.
I think the earliest, I'm not sure if the absolute earliest evidence comes from Mesopotamia first. But yeah, you're right. Like, when we think of beer, we think of Europe, because it's such a thing there. It turns out the Egyptians made a lot of beer. It was like their thing. So they drank wine as well, but beer was also a part of the culture there. So beer held great significance in Egyptian society. It was consumed by people of all classes, from laborers to pharaohs. So it was everywhere. So was wine. Wine was also consumed. I think wine was more of a upper social class thing. So beer was considered a staple in Egyptian diet and was consumed on a daily basis in massive quantities.
Okay.
So it was basically like water, drunk like water. In fact, it was considered more of a food than it was as a drink, like a staple, in a diet, like a diet staple.
I feel like not with Egypt, but with Europe, mead and or beer
totally, yeah,
was the same thing as well, often because water wasn't safe to drink.
That's it. Yeah, I talk a little bit about that here. Yeah, totally. When you don't have really good staple water sources that are actually going to be if you've got treated, it's basically like a treated water. Basically is how they looked at it in a way. Also, I think to remember is alcohol, like wine and beer that was consumed in ancient times, was far less alcoholic than it is now.
Okay.
So it was a lot more watered down. It wasn't as punchy as it is now. In fact, there's this book called, I think it's called Drunk, and I've only just started I've been listening to it as an audiobook, but it kind of goes through the history of alcohol. And yeah, that's a big thing. It wasn't as alcoholic.
Right.
So yeah, anyway. It was particularly essential for labourers who were given daily rations of around 10 pints a day in Egypt. That
Shit.
was a part of a payment system and a rationing system as that's a lot. Imagine drinking 10 pints of beer today. You'd be fucked.
I don't even drink 10 pints of water.
No, exactly. Yeah, so true. It also held a more divine status, as there were several gods and goddesses who were associated with beer, such as my personal favourite, Hathor, which you mentioned before.
Which is funny because the temple to Hathor was at the turquoise mine from the 12th and 13th dynasty, so it would have been workers
Yeah, 100%.
going to temple,
Well, this might make a little bit more sense. So Hathor, she's seen like everywhere in Egypt.
Yeah.
Also, like another thing we should mention, like we've both been there. Belle has more of a bit of a personal connection to Egypt than I do. It's amazing.
It is amazing. We love it.
Yeah. And Hathor is like, it's really interesting when you see her depicted in like, in monuments as well as like in, you know, tombs and inscriptions and stuff. She's always facing, well, generally speaking, not always, but she's facing forward. So like,
which is not
common. I don't think I can't think of another god or goddess that's actually, there probably are. I just can't think of one off the top of my head. But she's facing forward with the little cow ears.
Yeah.
So you can always pick her out, like, because she doesn't just look like any other goddess kind of thing. She's always facing forward. So she is the goddess of love, beauty, and dance. And she's also known as the Lady of Drunkenness. And I love that. I think that is amazing. And her backstory is actually really cool and particularly relevant to this. So the story goes, so the sun god Ra was dissatisfied with humanity as his people weren't worshipping him properly or often enough, and he considered them to be lazy and selfish.
It's such a classic, like was Zeus's issue with humans as well, wasn't
it? Yeah, totally.
Like,
oh, yeah, true. They
weren't worshipping him
well enough.
Hard enough. Like.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so as a fuck you, he turned his daughter Hathor into a batshit crazy, bloodthirsty, lion-headed goddess named Sekhmet, and basically let her loose on mankind to punish them.
Okay.
So that's how the story goes. And she basically went on this massive rampage, destroying entire cities, like in her path and villages. And this, at first, made Ra super happy. And after a while, he started to feel bad because everyone was dying. And also realized that if she killed everyone, there'd be no one to worship him anymore. And so that was probably not a
he didn't think that one. Yeah, he didn't think that one
he
through.
Did not think that one through. So he couldn't figure out a way to stop her until he came up with an ingenious plan to order the production of a shitload of beer and mix it with hematite, which I think is like a clay?
Hematite is a mineral.
Yeah, like a mineral.
Found. It's a magnetic mineral that's like a really red colour, similar to like iron.
Yeah.
So like a lot of the times like really red soils will have hematite in them.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that. And it was used to make the beer turn a blood red. So that's why he mixed it in. And he flooded the Nile and the floodplains with this beer, this blood red beer. So Sekhmet thought it was human blood and lapped it all up and got super fucking drunk in the process and eventually passed out.
Had a little tactical nap.
Yeah, she was just feeling a bit, she just needed a bit of a nap. And when she passed out, we've definitely all been there. And when she passed out, she transformed back to Hathor, the peaceful goddess, and became devoted to protecting humanity, particularly women, from sickness and evil. And so every year they used to commemorate the event called the Tech Festival or the Festival of Drunkenness, and where the aim of the game was to get as drunk as possible and pass out, which is amazing.
Why don't we celebrate that festival?
I think we should bring this back. It's like, yeah, every year they had this like massive festival and they like really worshipped her, and it was kind of like the savior of humanity kind of, she was, so they kind of recreate that by drinking as much as possible and getting pissed drunk and having a nap, and I love that. So beer had like a symbolic and mythological significance in ancient Egypt. It was obviously associated with Hathor, who was depicted as a cow pouring beer from her udders. So that's why, so you see she like Hathor with the little cow ears. And so it's not just milk, it's also beer that she's supposed to be producing and kind of making everyone happy and a little bit, Also like it also mentions as well that during these times of everyone being super intoxicated, everyone got very lovey with one another.
I bet they did.
Which also kind of feeds into the fertility aspect of Hathor and having babies and stuff. I'll leave it at that. So early evidence of beer production in ancient Egypt dates back to at least the 5th millennium BCE. The earliest evidence of beer production comes from hieroglyphic inscriptions, tomb paintings, and archaeological remains as well. The beer making process in ancient Egypt involved several steps. Barley was the primary ingredient used in the brewing of the beer. The grain was soaked in water and then allowed to germinate, creating malt. The malt was then dried, crushed, and mixed with water to form a mash. This mixture was strained, the liquid was collected, and then fermented.
I always think about things like that. And who first came up with that process and how?
Yeah, so like in that book Drunk that like I mentioned before, it kind of like starts in on that. And there's this kind of theory that, you know, we always hear about the great agriculture like kind of revolution where we started making bread for the first time and that like, you know, started getting grain, and that's why we started stockpiling. That's how civilizations grew, and that's how the whole process happened. But there's a theory now to suggest that they did that to make beer first, and that was their primary kind of outcome. And beer and bread was more of a secondary kind of that's a theory at least. Who knows, could be bread, could have been beer. Either way, they kind of came up at the same time.
Well, it's entirely possible that there was actually more, that the beer had more nutritional
value. Yeah, and as well, if you're like having liquid, like, you know, water that's treated, that's definitely going to be safe for you. Like, and that's another kind of reasoning for this theory. And the way that they can make this whole kind of process happen is from the yeast created from this process kind of thing. Anyway, so the fermentation techniques used was through natural wild yeasts present in the environment. So brewers often used bread or dates as additional sources of yeast to add to the fermentation process if they needed it. And the fermentation took place in large vats or jars where the beer was left to ferment for several days. And that's how it creates beer. So the beer varieties, the ancient Egyptians brewed different types of beer. The most common type was a thick porridge-like beer known as heket, which sounds a little bit disgusting.
Yeah.
A porridge
beer?
A porridge beer. That's so gross. As I'm drinking my beer. Another popular variety was a lighter, more drinkable beer called Sir Tenet. Some beers were flavoured with fruit, spices, or herbs, while others were left unflavoured. So they had like
a variety,
full variety of different beers that you could buy and be given as like payment or trade, or like, I think that's really cool.
Very.
So as you mentioned before, like beer having nutritional value, beer was considered a vital source of nutrition in ancient Egypt. It provided essential nutrients and calories and was often consumed as a substitute for water, which we mentioned, which was obviously sometimes contaminated. So that's why beer was so important. So beer production was not just a domestic activity, it was also a specialised profession. So this was something that was happening on a large scale that wasn't just happening
people weren't just
personally.
Making it.
No, like it was actually being, you know, by the state or by religious kind of entities. The brewers were highly skilled individuals who were often employed by temples or the state. Beer production was not limited to individual households, and breweries produced large quantities of beer, which was distributed and sold across the country, making it obviously a really valuable commodity.
Yeah.
So some of the archaeological evidence of this is pretty cool. So tomb paintings in ancient Egypt often depict scenes of daily life, including beer production and consumption.
Cool.
These
shows.
shows.
If we can find some. I would like to see.
100%. We'll put some up. Yeah. In this. Yeah. people like engaged in tasks like grinding barley
Yeah.
and brewing and straining and serving beer. I also saw like little like ritual like objects of brewing process, like scenes of people actually doing like the processes of making it. So that's kind of cool. And you find them in tombs, like wooden sculptures.
Yeah,
of it,
cool.
which is kind of cool. The village of Deir el Medina is a site in western Thebes which housed the workers and artisans who constructed the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. So it was a whole entire village just for these people who were working there, because obviously there was constant work.
Yeah.
No matter what time, there was always work going on there.
I guess it would take like probably the entire duration of a pharaoh's rule to construct their tomb.
Yeah, 100%.
Then they die, and then you start on the next one.
100%. And they started them early as well, because you don't know how long.
Yeah.
People, especially back then, you're not going to live very long, except for Ramses II, which we talked about in the episode that we didn't end up actually putting out there.
So we will do that stuff again.
Yeah, we'll do that. But how, like, I think he.
Like 90?
That's insane.
Early
like,
90s?
Yeah. Like, imagine, like, that's insane. Like, living that late. Anyway, this is a really cool piece of evidence that was found. At this like village, Deir el Medina, they found a letter, like a papyri, like letter, from a draftsman named Prehotep, accusing his boss of not getting drunk with him after work and just being like, what's going on? You need to invite me and like have beers with you after work. And he like signs off the letter being like something, I didn't write it. It was something like, you know, so basically like, I don't have any beer in the house. So can we make this happen kind of thing? Like, you know, and it's kind of like calling your boss and being like, hey, I don't have any wine at home. Like, should we go out?
Yeah, why haven't you had me over for some wine?
Yeah, like
after
we should definitely do that. Like, what's wrong with you? So I love that, and that's such a personal little like tidbit, you know, of how important beer was. This guy was like, excuse me, I want to get drunk. So oh my God, I'm going to say this wrong. Herakonopoulos. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't say this. Herakonopoulos.
Sure.
Herakonopoulos. I think that's what
I'm
it is
not
now.
going to be able to help you.
Is an important ancient Egyptian city, and it's revealed evidence of large-scale beer production facilities. Excavations at the site have uncovered a dedicated brewery complex.
That would be so cool to excavate.
So fucking cool to excavate, with numerous mud brick vats, storage vessels, and ovens used in the beer making process. Chemical and botanical residue analysis on the beer vats show the presence of caramelized sugars and grain, kind of just further demonstrating that these were definitely used for beer making. Like they weren't used for something else. Like
right.
when we use residue analysis.
It was just for that. Yeah,
like, you know, that's a pretty good evidence to suggest it. The vats found in this complex had a total capacity of 390 litres and was in operation 5,500 years ago.
Wow.
That's a really long time ago. And they believe the site could facilitate a 2-day brew fermentation cycle, which supplied 300 litres a day. And if you think about it, like 10 pints per worker as
true.
Just a ration, you go through that so quickly.
Yeah.
Like, they also found another one in Abydos. Abydos, right?
I think so.
Abydos, that's how you say it. Is it? I don't know. It is now. A prominent ancient Egyptian burial site. So yeah, Abydos is a prominent ancient Egyptian burial site or necropolis.
Yeah.
Archaeologists in 2021 discovered large beer jars and a specialized beer making installation known as a beer lab, consisting of ovens, brewing vessels, and storage jars. It is one of the largest scale beer operations ever found, and is around 5,000 years old, so around the same time as the other one. And this one was from the time of King Narmer, who was the pre-dynastic ruler who supposedly united both Upper and Lower Egypt. So this guy's like a pretty big deal. I think he's the one in that stele, in that stele, right? Who's going like this and
the Nama palette, I think it's called.
The Nama, yeah,
which is in the Cairo Museum.
Yes, it
like
is.
This big.
Yeah, yes, I have seen it. Yeah. And I think it's when he defeated the Kush. Is that when he defeated the Kush, and that's how he united
Upper and Lower into one?
I think that could be so wrong, but I think that sounds right in my head.
If it's wrong, it's going to be close.
It's going to be close, I think, right? Maybe. I don't know. I've seen it. It's really cool. It's a
correct us, because we are incapable of correcting ourselves.
Yeah. And also, if you are watching this, you will see corrections on there. But if you're hearing it, you will not be seeing. We do often actually correct ourselves in like the post-production process. So the brewery is believed to have been built in this area to provide beer, not for the people, but for ritual use. This is due to archaeologists finding evidence of beer being used in sacrificial rites. So this beer wasn't being used for the population or for the workers. It was just being used just for ceremonies and just for like the religious rites in that area, because obviously it being in the necropolis, that's...
What part of sacrificial rites would it have been used?
I don't know.
Getting the sacrifices all wasted before being sacrificed?
Maybe, yeah, I guess so. Or like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe we should look into that. That's interesting. This place was actually already known about since the early 1900s, but its location was never confirmed until 2021. So I think in the 1900s, maybe it was Petrie. Who knows? But they knew about it, but they just couldn't find it again. Or
I wonder how.
I don't know.
They knew.
Maybe someone stumbled upon it, and then just didn't get a chance, and then it just got kind of lost. Anyway,
like in The Mummy.
Oh my God! Like in The Mummy,
they know about where the place is, but not that many people have been there.
Oh my God, totally. Favorite movies of all time. I don't give a fuck.
Absolutely love. We love Brendan Fraser.
I am so glad that he's back, by the way.
Have you seen, I haven't watched it yet, the one that he just won the Oscar for? The Whale?
He won an Oscar for that?
Yeah.
I didn't see it, no.
Or some sort of major award. Maybe it wasn't an Oscar, but no, I'm pretty sure it was.
I know that he got like 7-minute standing ovation or something. And that kind of made me cry. Seeing him cry kind of made me a little bit teary. I have loved that man forever, and it made me really sad when he dropped off, and he's back. And he happy.
Lost all his money, and he
went through a bad divorce or something.
He had a really bad time.
Yeah. Anyway, he's back now.
He's back.
Am I glad?
Yay.
Yay. Ancient Egyptian beer recipes have been discovered. Although slightly off topic, there is a hymn to Ninkasi, which is an ancient Sumerian poem that actually describes the brewing process and serves as a recipe for beer production. So like that Mesopotamian region, Egypt and Mesopotamia kind of thing, that was it was a big thing there. So you can imagine being quite close to each other. You've got that kind of flow of information and stuff.
I've always thought about because that's where, the Near East, that just sort of general part of the world is where mass agriculture began.
Yeah, what do they call it? The crescent something. I have had
the fertile
crescent.
Yes,
crescent. That's it. Yeah.
And I've just always thought about that in terms of food. I've never thought about beer before, but beer was considered a food, so
so it kind of makes sense, and that's the whole thing. Like in that area, was it because they wanted to make bread, or was it because they wanted to make Anyway, that's all I really have. That's also
awesome.
Yeah, beer's still it's a massive thing. All the way up in ancient Egypt, beer was a massive thing, and wine as well, wine consumption as well. But my main takeaway from that is how amazing Hathor is, and she's my spirit goddess, basically.
I also like how I don't know, if you look at any of the gods from anywhere that are associated with drinking, Bacchus or like Dionysus?
Yeah.
Something like that. I can't remember his name. But they're always
Dionysus,
really fun. Like
they're the best kind of people. They're really like
orgies.
They love the party.
They loved having a good time.
Yeah. And they were
in all the various ways of having a good time.
And they're often like depicted as really docile, kind of like, you know, not violent. They don't have any real issues.
They just want to have a good time.
They just want to have a good time. And I think that's a really good way to be. Yeah. You know, Hathor has a bit of a violent past, but
that wasn't because of
that was
the
lack
booze.
of.
That was because of the lack of.
That was the lack of the booze. That was the issue. And I think we can all learn something from that. I think that's the main takeaway from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that. Cheers to Hathor. Thank you.
Awesome.
So that's it. I mean, we can go forever. And
it's
obviously,
2 very random snippets associated with Egypt.
Yeah.
And Egypt is one we're going to be able to do.
We're going to do a lot of, I think.
4 billion episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do many episodes on Egypt because there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah. And we love Egypt. And
yeah. We can talk more about that next time.
You can tell us what you want to know more about
True.
Egypt. Like, what do you want to hear us babble on about? Or, like, just discuss more about? We have, personally, we have a few of our favourite pharaohs we'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
A few of our favourite places.
Our own experiences being there.
If you want to hear a little bit about that, let us know.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap it up.
Thanks. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon.
Bye.